A racist cop thought he could steal from a helpless black homeless man and walk away like nothing happened. But what he didn't know, the entire world was watching. When the truth came out, his career, his reputation, and his future were destroyed in a way no one saw coming. This is the moment his life fell apart. The night was cold. Not the kind of cold that just bites at your skin, but the kind that settles deep in your bones, the kind that makes survival feel like an impossible battle. On the corner of a nearly empty street, slumped against the brick wall of a closed-up liquor store, sat Marcus Hayes. His clothes were ragged, his fingers trembling as he clutched a thin blanket, one that barely shielded him from the icy wind whipping through the city. His stomach twisted in hunger, but he was used to that by now. What hurt more was the way people walked past him as if he were invisible. Marcus wasn't always homeless. He had dreams once, a job, a life. But one misstep, a stroke of bad luck, was all it took for everything to unravel. Now, the streets were his home, and survival was his only goal. And that night should have been like any other. But it wasn't, because that was the night Officer Darren Calloway arrived. At first, Marcus thought he was in trouble. A black man alone in the dead of night, sitting on the pavement. He'd had enough run-ins to know how these encounters usually went. But Calloway wasn't here to arrest him. No, he was smiling. A smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You all right out here, buddy?" The officer squatted beside him, voice coated in fake concern. Marcus hesitated. Just trying to get by." Calloway nodded, looking him up and down before reaching into his pocket. For a split second, Marcus's heart lifted. Was this officer actually about to help him? Then he saw it. A $20 bill. Crisp. Clean. Hope. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't eaten a real meal in days. That 20 could mean the difference between another night starving or finally feeling full. The officer held the bill between his fingers, letting it dangle just out of reach. He said, his tone suddenly shifting. "Life's tough out here. Must be hard not knowing where your next meal's coming from." Marcus nodded slowly. He didn't trust this. Something felt off. And then, the moment that changed everything. As Marcus reached out, Calloway's expression twisted into something cruel. With a quick flick of his wrist, he yanked the money back, his laughter slicing through the night like a blade. "You actually thought I was going to give you this?" he sneered. "Come on, man. You people always looking for handouts." Marcus froze. His fingers still hung in the air, just inches from where the bill had been. Humiliation flooded his chest. The ache in his stomach was nothing compared to the burning in his heart. But before he could react, Calloway did something worse. So much worse. With one swift motion, he reached into Marcus's tattered coat pocket and pulled out what little money he had left. Just a few crumpled dollars, barely enough to buy a piece of bread. Marcus gasped. "Hey, what the hell, man? That's all I got." But Calloway just grinned. "Consider it a fine," he said, tucking the stolen cash into his pocket. "Loitering's a crime, ain't it?" And then he walked away. Just like that. No shame, no guilt. He had done this before. He knew no one would believe a homeless man's word over a cop's. Marcus sat there, stunned. Rage, shame, powerlessness. It all twisted inside him like a storm. But what could he do? Who would listen? What Calloway didn't know was that someone had been listening. Someone had seen everything, and what happened next would destroy Calloway's entire life. Marcus sat frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. The cold wind didn't matter anymore. The hunger didn't matter. The shame burned hotter than anything he had felt in a long time. He stared at the sidewalk where his few crumpled bills had been, his hands still trembling in the air, as if they could somehow pull the money back from thin air. How could this happen? Not that it was new. He had seen cruelty before. He had been ignored, insulted, pushed aside like garbage. But this was different. This was robbery. And the worst part? It was legal. At least that's how Officer Darren Calloway acted. Like he could do whatever he wanted. Because who was going to stop him? A homeless black man. No one would believe him. No one would care. That's what Calloway thought. But what he didn't know, the entire world was about to find out. Across the street, hidden just behind a rusted street lamp, a phone had been recording. A woman named Jasmine Carter had been on her way home from work when she saw it happen. She had stopped for just a second, planning to keep walking, because what could she do? Confront a cop. But then, she saw the way Calloway laughed, the way he snatched that last bit of money out of Marcus's hands like it was a game. Something inside her snapped. She pulled out her phone and hit record. Every second of that sickening exchange. Captured. Every cruel word. Caught. Every smirk. Every flicker of amusement in Calloway's eyes as he stole from a man who had nothing. Now in the hands of someone who was not about to let this slide. Jasmine's fingers shook as she stopped the recording. Her heart raced. "This is going online," she muttered to herself. "This man is done." She turned toward Marcus, who was still sitting there, staring blankly at the sidewalk. Her heart twisted. He looked so broken. She couldn't just walk away. Not after seeing that. So she crossed the street. Marcus barely noticed her at first. He was still trying to process what had just happened. "Hey," Jasmine said gently, crouching down beside him. "Are you okay?" Marcus blinked up at her, confused. People didn't usually stop. Not for him. He swallowed hard, trying to find his voice. "That cop. I saw," Jasmine cut in. "I got everything on video." For a second, Marcus didn't react. Then his eyes widened. You recorded that?" She nodded. "And I'm posting it. People need to see this." Marcus let out a slow breath. Could this actually matter? Could someone actually hold Calloway accountable? He wanted to believe it, but experience had taught him otherwise. "No one cares about people like me," he muttered. "They'll just say I deserved it." Jasmine's jaw tightened. Number not this time. She pulled up her phone and started typing. Within minutes, the video was online. It started small, a few shares, a couple of angry comments. Then it hit Twitter. And that's when everything exploded. Within an hour, the video had 10,000 views. By morning, over 1 million. People were furious. "This is sickening. A cop straight up robbing a homeless man on camera, and he thinks he can just walk away? This officer needs to be fired. Immediately." Celebrities retweeted it. Activists called for action. News outlets picked it up. And suddenly, Officer Darren Calloway was no longer just another cop abusing his power in the shadows. He was the most hated man in America. And this was only the beginning of his downfall. Officer Darren Calloway had no idea. As he pulled into the station the next morning, sipping his overpriced coffee, adjusting his uniform, and greeting his fellow officers with smug nods, he had no clue his entire world was already crumbling beneath him. He had spent years believing he was untouchable. He had done worse things than stealing a few crumpled bills from a homeless man. And nothing had ever happened. No reports, no consequences, no one cared. But this time, the world was watching. By the time Calloway sat down at his desk, his phone was vibrating non-stop. Unknown numbers, missed calls, hundreds of notifications. He frowned, scrolling through the messages. Then he saw it. His name. Trending. The words hit him like a gut punch. Number Fire Officer Calloway, number Justice for Marcus. Disgusting. Fire him now. This is why we don't trust cops. Sickening. How many times has he done this before? His hands went cold. This had to be a mistake, a misunderstanding. Then he clicked on the video. And in an instant, he knew. The grainy night footage, his own face, clear as day, the smug grin, the way he dangled the $20 bill like a joke. The moment he stole from Marcus and laughed. Every second of it, caught in 4K. His chest tightened. How did this happen? Who recorded this? His mind raced, scrambling for an excuse. Maybe he could say it was fake. Edited. A setup. Maybe, "Calloway, in my office, now." The booming voice of Chief Reynolds cut through his thoughts like a blade. Calloway's stomach dropped. The office door slammed behind him. Chief Reynolds sat at his desk, his face red, His eyes locked onto his computer screen. The video was playing. "Do you have any idea what kind of firestorm you've started?" Reynolds growled, pausing the footage right at the moment Calloway's smirk curled across his lips. Calloway opened his mouth, but Reynolds wasn't finished. "The mayor called me this morning." His voice was dangerously low. Mayor Calloway swallowed hard. "We've got reporters outside the damn station," Reynolds continued, voice thick with barely contained rage. "Activists, protesters. And you? You're the reason." Sweat trickled down Calloway's neck. "Sir, this is being blown out of proportion." Calloway started, his voice shaky. "It was just a joke. The guy's homeless. Reynolds slammed his fist on the desk. "That's your defense?" His face twisted in disgust. "Let me tell you something, Calloway. This is not a joke. You're not just some random cop getting bad press. You're a liability. You're a PR nightmare." He pointed at the screen. "You know who saw this video? Everyone. And you know who they're blaming? United States, the department, the entire city, and now the mayor's breathing down my damn neck." Calloway felt the walls closing in. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was supposed to get away with it, like always. "Sir," he tried again, "I can fix this. I can go public, say it was taken out of context." Reynolds laughed bitterly. "Out of context? What context justifies you robbing a man who has nothing?" Calloway had nothing to say. "You're done," Reynolds said, voice final. "Turn in your badge and gun. Effective immediately, you're suspended. Pending investigation." Calloway's heart stopped. Suspended? No. This was his career. His entire life. His hands clenched into fists. "This is unfair. We've all done things like this before, and you know it. But suddenly, because some woke social media mob is mad, I'm the one who gets burned." Reynolds stood up so fast his chair nearly toppled. "That's exactly the problem, Calloway. You thought you could keep doing this. You thought no one would ever hold you accountable." He leaned in. "Well, guess what?" His voice dropped to a low growl. "The world is watching, and I am not going down for you." Calloway's breath came fast and shallow. His chest ached. This couldn't be happening. But it was about to get so much worse. Outside, news cameras flashed. Protesters chanted. Marcus's name was everywhere. And by the end of the day, the entire country would be demanding Calloway's head. And this was still only the beginning. Darren Calloway stormed out of the police station, his fists clenched so tight, his nails dug into his palms. His career was slipping through his fingers, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The moment he stepped outside, a wall of flashing cameras and angry voices hit him like a tidal wave. "Officer Calloway, do you have any comment on the video? Are you going to apologize to Marcus Hayes? Do you think you'll be fired? Do you regret what you did?" A crowd had gathered. Protesters held up signs with bold, unforgiving words. "Fire Calloway! Justice for Marcus! No more dirty cops!" The chants grew louder. The signs waved in the air like a sea of judgment crashing down on him. Calloway's pulse skyrocketed. He had never felt like this before, hunted, exposed. His instinct screamed at him to fight back, to shove past them, to yell, to make them shut up. But he knew that would only make things worse. So instead, he yanked his hood over his head, shoved past the reporters, and ran. At home, Calloway slammed the door shut and locked it. His breathing was ragged. His phone buzzed non-stop, but he couldn't bring himself to look. He already knew what he'd find. Death threats, hate messages, calls from people he hadn't spoken to in years, some to check on him, most to cut ties. His social media. A disaster. His name was being dragged through every corner of the internet. People were digging through his past, looking for more victims, and they were finding them. Old complaints from black and homeless residents that were ignored, stories of him harassing people, writing false tickets, using his badge as a weapon against those who couldn't fight back. Everything was coming out. His past, his reputation, his power, all of it, crumbling. And then, the final blow. His phone rang. His wife. He hesitated before answering. "Hey, babe," he tried, forcing his voice to stay calm. Listen, don't believe everything you're seeing online. This is all being blown out of proportion. You know how these people get— Darren, she interrupted, her voice cold. I took the kids to my mother's. His stomach dropped. Wait, what? He sat up. Baby, come on. You know this is all gonna blow over. You know I didn't— Stop, just stop. Her voice cracked. She sounded tired. I defended you for years, she said. When people told me you were cruel, when they said you looked down on people, I told them they didn't know you like I did. She let out a shaky breath. But I saw the video, Darren. Silence. That man had nothing. And you took from him. And you laughed. Calloway squeezed his eyes shut. Why wouldn't she just listen? You don't get it, he snapped. These people, she shot back. You mean black people, homeless people, people who aren't you. He clenched his jaw. That's not what I— The words hit him like a punch to the gut. I can't raise our kids with a man like you, she whispered. Don't call me. The line went dead. Calloway stared at his phone, his entire body numb. His career, gone. His reputation, destroyed. His family, walking away. Everything he had built, burning to the ground. And the worst part? It wasn't over yet. Because the next morning, Marcus Hayes was going to speak, and the whole world would be listening. Marcus Hayes sat in a small, borrowed suit, a gift from a stranger who had seen his story online. He shifted in his chair, his fingers nervously clutching the edge of the table in front of him. He wasn't used to this. The bright lights, the cameras, the microphones capturing his every breath. For years he had been invisible, just another homeless black man on the streets. People walked past him every day like he didn't exist. But today, the entire world was watching. The interview had been set up by a well-known journalist, someone who wanted to give Marcus a voice. Marcus, first of all, thank you for being here. He nodded slowly. Yeah, thanks for having me. His voice was quiet, unsure. Millions of people have seen the video of what happened to you. Many of them are outraged, but we want to hear it from you. What was that moment like? Marcus inhaled sharply, his fingers tightening around the table. What was it like? He had lived through so much. Hunger, cold, pain, nights where he didn't think he'd make it till morning. But nothing had ever made him feel so small as that moment when Officer Calloway dangled that $20 bill in front of him. His throat felt tight, but this time he wasn't going to stay silent. It hurt, he said finally. Not just 'cause he took my money, but 'cause of the way he did it. Like it was funny. Like I was nothing. He swallowed hard. I've been ignored before. I've been called names. I've been looked at like I'm trash. But that moment, it was different. 'Cause he looked me in the eyes, and still did it. Like I didn't even deserve to breathe the same air as him. The room was silent. Even the interviewer looked shaken. And when you saw the video going viral, when you saw people standing up for you, how did that feel? Marcus exhaled slowly, his lips pressing together. I didn't think anybody cared, he admitted. I thought people would just watch it and move on. 'Cause that's what always happens, right? He looked down at his hands. But then, people started talking, people I ain't never met, standing up for me, saying my name. He let out a soft, almost disbelieving laugh. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't alone. The interviewer leaned forward. And what would you say to Officer Calloway, if he's watching this right now? Marcus didn't answer right away. He let the question sit, turning it over in his mind. Then, finally, he looked straight into the camera. I'd say, you tried to make me feel small. A pause. But now? The whole world sees you for who you are. The interviewer sat back, letting the weight of those words settle. And at that moment, Calloway knew. This wasn't just about a video anymore. This was his legacy. His name would never be separated from this moment. Forever. And what happened next would be the final nail in his coffin. Darren Calloway sat in the dark, the only light in the room coming from his TV screen. He didn't want to watch the interview, but he couldn't look away. Marcus Hayes, the man he had mocked and robbed, was staring straight into the camera. "You tried to make me feel small." Calloway's throat tightened. "But now, the whole world sees you for who you are." The words echoed in his head, over and over. His mouth went dry. He had lost. For the first time in his life, there was no excuse, no cover-up, no way out. This was it. The consequences hit harder and faster than he could have ever imagined. The morning after Marcus's interview, his suspension became a termination. The department released a statement. Officer Darren Calloway's actions were inexcusable and do not represent the values of this department. Effective immediately, he has been dismissed from duty. It was over. No pension, no final paycheck. Just a swift, merciless exit. And the backlash didn't stop there. His face was plastered across every news outlet. People dug up everything. Old complaints from black residents, reopened. Videos from years ago showing him harassing homeless people. Exposed. Ex-colleagues coming forward, admitting they had seen him abuse his power before. Confirmed. He wasn't just fired. He was blacklisted. No department would touch him. No private security firms would take him. His entire career in law enforcement was dead. But that wasn't the worst part. His family was gone. His wife didn't come back. She filed for divorce, took the kids, and cut him off completely. His in-laws called him a disgrace. Old friends stopped answering his calls. He was alone. And then, the final humiliation. His face was now a symbol of everything wrong with the system. Protesters carried signs with his name crossed out. Activists called him a thief in uniform. Late-night talk show hosts mocked him. And when he tried to defend himself, no one listened. He had spent his whole life treating people like they didn't matter. Now, he was the one who didn't matter. Meanwhile, Marcus Hayes' life was changing. For the first time in years, he had hope. A fundraiser was created in his name after the interview, and donations flooded in. Within weeks, he had enough to get a safe place to live, buy new clothes, enroll in job training, and most importantly, he had his dignity back. When asked what he wanted to do next, Marcus simply smiled and said, "Help people like me, the ones society forgets." As for Darren Calloway, he faded into obscurity, a disgraced man with no job, no family, and no power. The last time anyone heard of him, he was spotted leaving town, head down, hoodie pulled tight, no cameras, no badge, no control, just another man running from the consequences of his own actions. And just like that, the man who thought he was untouchable was erased. The world moved on, news cycles changed, other scandals took over, but one thing remained. The story of Darren Calloway became a cautionary tale. Colleges studied it. Activists used it as proof of why the system needed change. And most of all, cops started realizing that their badges wouldn't always protect them. Because if Calloway, an officer who once thought he was untouchable, could fall this hard, so could they. As for Marcus, his journey was just beginning. For the first time in a long time, he had choices. And he knew exactly what he wanted to do. With the help of activists and supporters, he started an outreach program for the homeless. Not just handing out food, but helping people get IDs, job training, and legal support. Real change. The kind he wished he had when he was on the streets. And the best part? The program's name, the Marcus Hayes Foundation. A name that once belonged to a man society ignored. Now one that stood for hope. 1 year later, a reporter caught up with Marcus. Standing outside a shelter he helped open, he looked different, stronger, healthier. A man with purpose. "Marcus," the reporter asked, "if you could go back to that night, would you change anything?" Marcus thought about it. About the cold. About the humiliation. About the moment a cop tried to make him feel worthless. Then, he shook his head. "No," he said, "because that night, that was the night the world finally saw me." The camera zoomed in, capturing the look in his eyes. Not broken, not lost, but powerful. And that was something no one could ever take from him again.